Okay, here are the solutions for the mock exam for differentiation rules. First, they ask us to find the derivative of function h, and function h is 6x over cosine x, and then they ask us to find the value of the derivative with x equals 0, right? Because this notation here just means h dash of x when x equals 0, right? So let's take a look at this function. We got a fraction, and the top of the fraction is 6x, and the bottom of the fraction is cosine of x. So we have a ratio between two functions that we do know how to take the derivative of, right? Because if we wanted to take the derivative just of 6x, we could use power rule. If we just wanted to take the derivative of cosine x, we could just do the derivative of the trig function cosine would be negative sine x, right? So it doesn't look so bad, but so we're going to do number 1 here for mock differentiation rules. And the first thing they want us to do is they want us to find the derivative of the function h, which is 6x over cosine x. And then they want us to find the value of the derivative when x equals 0. Okay, so first what we're going to do is we're going to look at the function h, and we're going to see that it seems to be two relatively easy functions divided by each other. And when we see that, we know that if we have a top function, which we know how to take the derivative of, and the bottom function, which we also know how to take the derivative of, we could use what we call quotient rule and assign a u value for the top and a v value for the bottom, and then use the quotient rule formula to figure out what the derivative of the two divided by each other is. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify that u, the numerator, is 6x, and v, the denominator, is cosine x. And then we find the derivatives of each. So the derivative of 6x is 6. The derivative of v dash is negative sine x, and you can find both of those through the formula sheet, right? Then we look at the formula sheet again, and we find the quotient rule formula, which is vu dash minus uv dash divided by v squared. Okay? And remember that one of the ways you can check to make sure that that's correct is the top line starts with v and the bottom line starts with v, not with v dash. Okay? So that's kind of the way I memorize it. If I'm in a hurry and I don't want to look at the formula sheet, I can think of it that way. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plug in each one of the values that I wrote up here in the data sheet. So the first value is going to be v, so cosine of x. U dash is going to be 6. U is going to be 6x, and v dash is going to be negative sine of x. So, and the bottom is going to be cosine of x squared. Okay. And so now I'm going to simplify it a little bit. I got 6 cosine of x plus, because the negatives are multiplied times each other and cancel out, I get plus 6x sine x, and I'm dividing everything by cosine squared x. So that is my expression for h dash. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute in x equals 0 and see what I get, because they want to know that. So I get 6 cosine 0 plus 6 times 0 sine x, sine of 0, divided by cosine squared of 0. Okay. Well, the bottom, cosine squared of 0, we might be worried that that is equal to 0, and if you have a denominator of 0, that kind of ruins everything. So let's look at the denominator first. Cosine of 0 is actually 1, so it's 1 squared. The bottom is 1. So the bottom is harmless. Then the top, 6 times cosine 0. Remember, cosine 0 is 1, so it's 6 times 1 plus 6 times 0 times sine of 0, which is also 0. And remember, the bottom is just 1 squared. So the top is going to be 6 divided by 1. So in the end, h dash when x equals 0 is 6. And there's a less obvious way to do it for those of you who like product rule. When you look at the function h, which is 6x divided by cosine x, you might not see that as a quotient. You might see it as a product. And the way you can do that is you can, kind of sneaky, you can rewrite the denominator as a numerator by just putting it to the exponent -1. So now we have an expression which we can solve easily using product rule, and then we have a second expression multiplied times it, which we could solve by using product rule and chain rule with a trig function. So let me show you how to do that. So let's say that 6x is considered u and cosine x to the -1 power is considered v. So I'm going to make a little data sheet for that. So 6x is u, and u dash is 6, and v is equal to cosine of x to the -1, and v dash would be equal to -1 times cosine x to the -2. That's the product rule. And then I do the chain rule on the inside, so it would be negative sine x multiplied times that. And if I fill the chain rule, which is uv dash plus u dash v, or the reverse of that, because it doesn't matter which comes first. 1 plus 3 is 3 plus 1. So I'm going to fill in each one now. So I'm going to get, oh, by the way, I'm going to simplify v dash a little bit. This is equivalent to sine of x times cosine of x to the -2, right? Because the negatives cancel out. So I'm going to put here sine of x times cosine of x to the -2 plus u dash, which is 6, and v, which is cosine of x to the -1. Okay, so this is my h dash, and even though it looks quite different than my h dash above, it's actually the same. Okay, and you can check that by reducing like each one of these fractions separately. So now what we're going to do is we're going to substitute x equals 0 into each one of these. Okay, so we're going to put 0 here because we're finding out what is it when h dash has x equals 0. Put 0 here, we put 0 here, and we put 0 here. What are we going to get? We're going to get 6 times 0, and sine of 0 is 0, so sine with x equals 0 is 0. And then if we put 0 into cosine of x, that's equal to 1, and that is to the -2 power, so that means it would be 1 squared on the bottom, right? And then for the other term, it would be 6 times, and cosine of 0 is 1, so it's the same thing as 6 over 1. And the first term, 6 times 0 divided by 1, is multiplied times 0 twice, and even once would be sufficient to make the first term 0, and the second term is 6, so we get 6, of course, just like in the above working. So let's move on to the next problem. Number 2. Let f of x equals e to the -3x, sine of x equals x minus pi over 3. Write down f dash and g dash. Okay, so f dash, let's look at what would be the derivative of e to the -3x. So remember, the derivative of e to the something is equal to e to the something times the derivative of something. So we'll put, instead of e to the -3x, we'll get e to the -3x. We just repeat the same thing again, and then we write the derivative of the something, which is -3x. The derivative of -3x is -3. So the derivative is -3 e to the -3x, right? Let's do the next one. G dash, the derivative of sine of x minus pi over 3. So the derivative of sine of something is equal to cosine of something times the derivative of the something. So we're going to put here sine x minus pi over 3, right? And we're going to take the derivative of it, and we'll get cosine of something. And in the something, we're just going to write down the exact same thing. And then we're going to take the derivative of the inside and multiply times the chain rule. And actually the derivative of the inside, x minus pi over 3, is just 1, right? Because the derivative of x is 1 and the derivative of negative pi over 3 is 0. So actually you don't need to write anything else, even though we just tried to do chain rule on it. Okay, so this is the derivative, cosine of x minus pi over 3. Then it says that h of x is equal to e to the negative 3x times sine of x minus pi over 3. So h of x is actually equal to f of x times g of x. Find h dash of x, then the exact value of h dash of pi over 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to use product rule, right? Because if we have f times g, we're actually multiplying together two things that we know the derivative of. Okay? So basically we're going to say, okay, e to the negative 3x is f, sine of x minus pi over 3 is g, and so the product formula, the product rule in this case is going to be f times g dash plus f dash times g. So my f, I look above, is e to the negative 3x. And g dash, when I look above, is cosine of x minus pi over 3. And the second term is going to be f dash, which is, h dash, which is negative 3 e to the negative 3x, and g is going to be sine of x minus pi over 3. Okay, that looks right. Now I'm just going to, well, I guess I can't really simplify it more than that. I guess you could factor out e to the negative 3x if you wanted to, but that doesn't really change anything. Okay, and the last step is, what if I want to make x equal to pi over 3? So I'm going to substitute pi over 3 in for every occurrence of x and see what I get. So I have e to the negative 3 times pi over 3 times the cosine of pi over 3 minus pi over 3, which is 0, minus 3 times e to the negative 3 pi over 3 again, times the sine of pi over 3 minus pi over 3, which is the sine of 0. Let's rewrite that. E to the negative 3 times pi over 3 is e to the negative pi. Cosine of 0 is equal to 1. Minus 3 to the negative 3 times pi over 3 is e to the negative pi. Sine of 0 is 0. So we're left with e to the negative pi times 1 minus 3 times e to the negative pi times 0, and e to the negative pi minus times 0 is just 0. So we're left with e to the negative pi. And that's it. In a math test, that's what you want to leave. You just leave e to the negative pi. And I think we're done.